I'm crossing fingers, huh? Just wait a minute. Oh, there we are.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Yeah, I welcome you today to another EUDF live session. Today, an afternoon one. And the topic today is designing thriving and productive work environments, a choice for humanity. And we will talk about the STSS Roundtable, Socio-Technical Systems. And I'm very excited to introduce you to no other but Bert Painter today from Canada, the president of the STSS Roundtable, and also filmmaker and producer. Hey, Bert, it's great having you here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tina. Yes. Yeah, I have a lot of good European friends, having spent quite a bit of time in Europe as well. So I really enjoy this opportunity.
No, it's great having you. I mean, like we had our fair share already before in conversations, and I wished we would have recorded them because there's a lot of good stuff I think that our audience is gonna take out of this conversation today. And to just start out with, so you have quite a story yourself, right? How you got into the field, how you touched the topic of shaping future workplaces. But yeah, you're a filmmaker as well and producer, and you have actually done 20 documentaries about innovative organizations. So obviously, I'm very curious about what you got out of that, and if that is somehow maybe connected to where you ended up being today.
Well, I'll just try to be concise here because it is a long story. I actually began my working life in film, in television, as a writer, director, and then producer of documentaries. But they weren't about workplaces. They were about doctors working in the Amazon, trying to work with indigenous folks. And then, as my wife and I grew a young family, we moved from the center of Canada, Toronto, Ontario, to Vancouver, where I've lived ever since. And this is about 55 years ago. So I began my working life in film. But then when I moved to the West Coast, I just couldn't get the work in film that I had before. So I had to look elsewhere. I had a background in economics and psychology and sociology. I did my graduate work actually in Europe at Lille University in France. Used to go to Brussels a lot as well. And I suddenly became an apprentice of people at the Tavistock Institute in the United Kingdom, namely folks like Eric Trist, who had in the 50s and 60s, and that's the sort of, it was in the early 70s when I began my association with STS. They had begun the formulation of socio-technical systems. And so I was extremely fortunate, and it was kind of a crazy story that a filmmaker, you can imagine someone with a cigar and a hat like from Cuba or something like that, becoming a sort of action researcher in the field. But that's what I became. I was apprenticed by those folks, extremely lucky. And then as I became more experienced in my work in socio-technical systems in the 70s, beginning in the 80s, I started to document many of the situations that I was involved with in terms of helping people design their work. And in the course of which I learned a lot, because a documentary is really a story. It's a story of discovery. And the whole purpose of making the documentaries was to try to provide labor leaders and managers and consultants in the field with visual images of people that actually demonstrate the possibility of very creative design of work and meaningful design of work. And so it's wonderful to hear managers talking about how it was a real challenge for them to start to work in this much more uncertain field of very participative design as opposed to very applied predictive design, imposed design of work. And so in a sense, I learned really how much of this is a human drama. Behind all the concepts we may talk about in the remainder of this podcast, there's a human drama going on where people are, in my terms, rewriting the scripts of themselves as organizations, themselves as teams, and themselves as members, individual members of some entities. So it's a human drama.
Yeah, resonates a lot with me. and it's exciting because we talk a lot today about like new work and the future of work, right? When we talk about concepts like self-organization or so forth, which is interesting because maybe it's not new, and it's probably not new, right? It has been around. But to get into socio-technical systems, if our audience doesn't know what that is, how would you explain it?
Well, I think each of those phrases, socio-technical systems, is important. And I agree. I do think there's some complexity in the terminology that is a challenge for all of us. But let me put it this way. I think it essentially is about organizing for three things at once. Organizing for humane, productive, and innovative work. The innovative part speaks to more the system dimension that faces out to the environment in providing a service or a product to a community, to a patient, to a user, and also to the interdependence of the human, the social, and the technical. But it's about trying to achieve these three end outcomes simultaneously, not either or, simultaneously. And what underlies this approach to the organization of work, which applies to like organizational entities, networks, and even larger systems like cities and so forth, are some essential insights. I would say that every work organization is essentially a socio-technical system, but not every organization is designed as a socio-technical system. Because if you design it as a socio-technical system, you are trying to optimize the interdependence and the contribution of each of the social and the technical. And that's why, bearing in mind the systemic nature of this interaction is critical. I think a lot of people, particularly in the engineering world, will acknowledge there's a socio and a technical dimension to getting things done. But they tend to look at them in parallel rather than in terms of their interaction and interdependence. I sent Lorena some slides, and there's a slide that might illustrate part of what I'm trying to say, but it's slide number 4 in the deck I sent you, Lorena. Yeah, this is the one. Yeah,
that was quick.
This is a formulation of STS that I really like, that a colleague of mine now living and working in British Columbia, she's a business school professor, her name is Terry Griffith, and wrote a really neat book called The Plugged In Manager. She talks about 5T, which is the way of organizing work as an interconnected system, in which we have to always work in terms of the interaction, interdependence between the target we have in terms of strategy or business model and our goals, the talent that we employ and that we develop, which is namely the human, the personal dimension in terms of knowledge and skill and motivation. Then there's the technology, which could be software, hardware. Then there's the technique, which are the processes we use in order to realize these outcomes. And then the times is more the context, which is the environment within which all this goes on. And if you pull up the slide number 6, Lorena, this is a more complex formulation of what I mean by socio-technical design. Because now, you remember, there's the organizing for humane, productive, and adaptive, innovative work. And the adaptive dimension of this is critical, particularly in this day and age when we're dealing with, tremendous amounts of change in the world and the context in which we live. And so, from a design standpoint, one always begins with a sense of purpose. And then it becomes a matter of developing an operating model where we really maximize the fit. And it's the fit between technology, people, process, and now data that allows us to achieve desired outcomes that really need to be specified in combination with people in the ecosystem, entities in the ecosystem. And increasingly, that ecosystem is critical. And as you see, there's a feedback loop in which the business model itself can get reformulated based upon the involvement and the input of the potential clients, customers, and entities that we work with in our ecosystem. So when people say there's a relationship between STS and Agile, there really is, in terms of developing a process and a way of working that is highly adaptive, not just for project work, but for the whole organizational entity. And I can illustrate this a little bit in terms of, I think one of the questions that we discussed earlier, Tina, is what does it mean to utilize technology and process to augment the human experience? And one of my more dramatic, and I mean, this was not made into a film, so this is a different kind. It's been written up, but involved telephone operators in the 1990s, before we had highly automated telephone systems, and digital networks were just starting to come in. But I worked with a number of telephone operators who were experiencing very painful electric shocks in their ears. These were people that were providing directory assistance, and most of them were women, but not all. And they're working at a high-paced job where they had to provide people with a telephone number or assistance for an international call or whatever within 30 seconds. And they did this, hundreds of times a day, rapidly. And because of this experience of these electric shocks, the telephone company thought, well, maybe it's the electrostatic effect of the carpets in the rooms that they're working. So they changed all the bloody carpets. They got rid of the carpet. That didn't help. And that's how I got involved, because they were trying to find a way to deal with this issue of electric shock. Well, lo and behold, this is now in the early 90s. And by that time, I learned about STS work in Europe and ran across the work of a gentleman by the name of Karasak, who had this demand control model of stress. And what struck me with these telephone operators was that they were really dealing with a very high level of stress. And we had to adjust the demands, or deal with the demands that they were dealing with. And so how we really did that was by changing the work process and changing the technology in order to reduce the demands on them. At the same time, we were increasing the controls they had. So, for example, this meant that we changed some of the software so that they could get information faster than they could before, and it made it easier for them to deal with the rush of providing information to their customers. They also changed the process whereby, as telephone operators, they also became involved in the overall administration of the telephone service. So they weren't just operators. And I'll never forget, at the end of this redesign experience, the telephone operators, and like I say, many of them were women, said, I'm not just an operator anymore. I have a much larger contribution to make. And what this reminds me of is that the way that a lot of this integration of the technical and human actually is developed is through the participation of people themselves in the design work. It isn't the work of me as a socio-technical systems thinker, researcher, designer. It's the work of those folks. All I do is support them in doing that.
That makes a lot of sense. And what is also interesting, Bert, is that if you look at, for example, a software, so just like isolated, I mean, there's the software doesn't know what purpose it has, right? So you cannot look at it like just like, it is not part of the system. You need to look at it interdependently, as you said, right? But that is still happening a lot.
Well, again, I've done most of my work in manufacturing, but I worked once a fairly major project with an insurance company, and they were bringing in a whole bunch of new software to convert what had been basically paper-based processes to electronic processes. So all the information was now handled digital. And this was, at the turn of the century, and there was a lot of fanfare around software development, the hype in the year 2000 and so forth. And, these IT folks were very well intentioned because they really believed that they had software that could manage the flow of information way better than could be done through paper. And in many respects, they were correct. But the problem was that the formulation of what information people needed was being prescribed by these IT folks and not by the people actually doing the work. So they brought in this new information system, and I mean, people couldn't use it. They could not provide the service they wanted to. Fortunately, we had in this environment of the insurance company a very active, strong, robust union management working relationship. And they came to agree that it would be through a union management partnership that they would reconfigure the whole software system. And so we went into a process of building prototypes of reconfigured software, by which actually the whole business model for the insurance company changed. Because not only were they providing payment on insurance claims based upon the processing of claims that were sent in, but they were now able to work in the ecosystem with doctors, physiotherapists, all the care providers, and involve them in helping expedite the recovery from the issues that had given rise to the insurance claim.
Yeah.
To me, again, that would not have happened without the participation of the real folks.
Of course. I mean, it makes completely sense, right? Because you need to stay fluid as an organization because it is a social system, right? So when the market is pulling, how are you responding? You need to be adaptive and also resilient, right? Because, I mean, it's like you need to be able to come back from whatever is happening, because it's like also I would say like almost a constant discovery and evolution. We have and it feels like that the speed is just increasing to a certain extent. And I know we're going to touch this and we can get to the topic now, but it's in our face, right? We talk about artificial intelligence. So
I actually prefer the word designing to the word design, because one of the underlying principles now, and this was always to some extent part of the STS, Socio-Technical Systems framework, was the notion of incomplete design. But now it's continuous design. It's not just incomplete, it's continuous. And it's a challenge. I mean, to be fair, I mean, people who operate and run a business, they've got a business to take care of. And oftentimes they would prefer to be operating in a stable state. That, unfortunately, for folks who are of that mind, does not exist anymore. And beyond that, of course, there's all sorts of advocacy for the notion of being prepared and inviting disruption. Well, that may be a bit of an extreme, but I just encourage people to continually keep an open mind, searching for their future, realizing they're in the present, they're not in their future, and they're going to need to work with all that change that's occurring around them in order to really appreciate what the opportunities are that are in front of them.
And yet, No, I mean, like I agree, and yet there is like this sometimes this need for safety, right?
Yes,
Or this illusion of control that we're kind of like we're so focused on what will the outcome be, and this is the right direction we're going to go to. These are the milestones, and this is what we're going to be following to get to this output. But at the end of the day, it's not even realistic, right? Because we cannot determine the future. So we need to actually focus on the how more. How are we in that process, and how do we make this continuous so it is evolving and is actually going with the needs of our world and market, right?
right. Yeah, and you know the slide that Lorena put up there of the 5 T's, which
Mm-hmm.
my colleague in the business school uses, and I use as well. Uh, it's really a way of thinking about an activity that one needs to be doing all the time, and she calls it work crafting, which can occur at the individual, at the team level, and certainly at the organizational level, and particularly now in the world of AI, where the technology is changing, by the minute, uh,
Yeah.
by the day. And so the tools that one has as a worker, as a craftsman, as a professional, are are changing all the time, and so you can expand your potential by being creative in how you craft your work. Yeah,
Yeah.
so in a sense, work crafting becomes part of the job.
Mm-hmm. And there you also, I mean, you're practically saying, I mean, everybody is owning craftsmanship. I always say, like, also people, everybody is an artist, right? So it's like the same. You're writing your own manuscript, and this is also how we look at organizations. Like every organization is different again,
Well,
right?
yeah, one of the things we haven't talked about the STS Roundtable, which is the organization of which I'm a member
Yes.
and have been for about 20 some years. And the roundtable actually evolved because of the innovative workplaces that were developing in North America in the 80s and 90s. But we have a meeting in Vancouver this year, which is focused around this notion that we have to be in an inventive frame of mind. We can't wait. Many people say is, what is the future of work? That's like waiting for it to come to us. We
Exactly.
need to be in the inventive frame where we invent what that future is. And right now, there's so much technology coming at people. Talk about anxiety in many cases, but there is
Mm-hmm.
opportunity here. But it's how we shape that technology that really is going to be the possibility of making this a human an outcome as opposed to some sort of efficiency management outcome.
Mm-hmm.
That may not be
Lorena
very
put the
human.
link in here. So for everybody who's interested, please click on it and travel to Vancouver in September.
Well, we
Yeah,
have a
no,
number of Europeans that are coming for sure. We have a good. We've limited it to 50 people because we want it to be very interactive, and because we're going to be developing some prototypes for various industry sectors like healthcare, manufacturing, um, agriculture. And so we probably close to a third, if not a half, will be from Europe.
amazing. Yeah. Well, it's such an important topic because, as you say, like we need to look into strategies, how we practically can, like, yeah, leverage, let's say, the technology, right, to
Well,
no?
I think part of what prompted us to focus on this theme of inventing the future of work and developing these prototypes was the emergence of AI.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've been at this work in socio-technical systems, even though I didn't go to school to do it, but I've become very much involved in it and excited by it for over 50 years. Um, I've gone through these evolutions when it was, starting with mechanized work, then we got into computer integrated manufacturing, and then we got into digital technology, and now we're dealing with artificial intelligence. And I have been working with it for the last 10 years or so, primarily in maintenance work in manufacturing. And where I live in British Columbia, we have a lot, and in Western Canada, we have a lot of paper manufacturing companies, and that's an area that and chemical companies are where I've done a lot of work. And AI has been applied a lot in maintenance work. But now we have the generative form, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a new challenge. I mean, Socio-Technical Systems has always been about developing the interdependence of the human and the technical. But now the real organizational design challenge is creating an environment where machine intelligence can work with human intelligence. It isn't just the machine being a tool. The machine is now intelligent
Mm-hmm.
and
It's our
can solve
co-creator.
problems on its own. It's not a human, but it's got a new form of activity that it didn't have 15 years ago. And so the real challenge is to make sure that machine intelligence works in support of and in combination with human intelligence. And a group that some of your colleagues in Europe might be very interested in is the whole network of human-centered AI, which is the technical folks that we have engaged with in the roundtable. The roundtable has always been an interdisciplinary community. We've had a lot of engineers working with us as more sort of socially trained, either psychologists or sociologists or economists, practitioners or management folks. But now we have a lot of IT folks, and particularly from the standpoint of human-centered AI. And human-centered AI is a socio-technical system in itself. It's putting the algorithm alongside human behavior, in which the intention is that we have very high levels of automation and high levels of human control. That's the key, if you like, addition of the human-centered approach to AI. This is not the mainstream approach to AI, because unfortunately, a lot of what is happening in the AI world is a race to compete with human intelligence, to equal or exceed human intelligence, as opposed to a race to develop machine intelligence that can augment and enhance human creativity and efficacy.
Yeah.
That's the difference. That's why I think we have a choice. Right now, we have a big choice about how we develop technology.
No, 100%. And I mean, like, I understand how overwhelming it can be as well, right? Because it feels like it's like this huge black box. How are we dealing with that? Aren't we dealing already with so many things, and now this is coming into our organization, and now we have to develop completely new strategies, which is actually at the end of the day, increasing the pressure of being more adaptive and responsive.
Well,
so
I have some suggestions for how you deal with that, because I agree,
please.
there's a lot coming at people. And I like to think that there's three things that you fundamentally need to keep in mind. And these ideas actually come from work I've done with companies that are starting to employ generative AI. I would say, first off, always focus on what the business needs. Don't race for the latest piece of software just because it looks like it's wow. Think of what your business needs or your service to your clients needs. Secondly, experiment, experiment, experiment. We've talked about this need to keep inventing and learning, but approach it more systematically as an experiment that really needs to be continually evolved, rather than you figure you've got a finished solution to how you're going to work. And the third one, of course, is to augment human contribution at the same time. And, I've been through this many times with AI. as I said, I've done a lot of work in manufacturing. There's a couple of really neat stories that I could tell very quickly, Tina, to illustrate what I mean. In maintenance work, there's lots of AI that came in about 10 years ago or so that was very good at predicting potential failure of equipment. In other words, with sensors and all that, you could get the data upon the vibration that was occurring in equipment, and you could have based upon data that had been gathered, because again, you had the whole with the digital revolution, you had all this burst of data that you could start to write algorithms based upon, and from that came all this predictive software. And so as maintenance people began to use it, there was an initial assumption that this would simplify the process and make a lot of the work of maintenance technicians much less complex, because now they would get answers to what they needed to do, rather than going around physically throughout the whole manufacturing plant trying to measure vibration. Now they had it all coming out of an algorithm as to what machines were in need of repair. And the initial premise in a number of companies I worked with was that this information would go to whom? The engineer, not the maintenance tech. And so we would probably need fewer maintenance techs. But the companies that I worked with had this experience working in a socio-technical frame and a participative design frame. So they actually worked with the maintenance techs so that they became trained in understanding these algorithms and managing these computer systems. So they were the ones that made the final call whether or not the signal given by the software was the one that was acted upon, or whether it would require some further investigation in order to decide how to act. So what it really did was augment the experience, the skill, and the definition of the job of the maintenance.
Yes.
And an even more dramatic story was a company that I worked with that was using drones to, they used to have these field workers go out every week or so and manually probe the depth of the piles of their wood chips that were the input to making pulp and paper. You've got to have raw material in order to make pulp and paper. So all these big piles of chips were out there, but the companies wanted to know how much we got. And they would manually try to measure them. They said, look, there's a better way of doing it now. Let's use drones that can go out there, fly over these piles, and visually scope out how much volume of chips there is in these different species. Well, I guess we don't need as many field technicians because we can employ these drones. But again, they were working within a socio-technical frame. So what happened was that these field techs were trained to operate these drones, but of course they could measure the volume of chips very quickly using these drones. So have they got a job really, or do we contract this out? No. What they began to think about was how they could apply the use of the drones in other areas like environmental management, because all these paper companies have got forests where the trees grow that bring the chips, right? So they've got to operate by certain rules. So these field technicians became drone operators and technicians. Their jobs expanded. It can be done.
That's it, right? Like
this is the right frame of mind.
It's the reinvention of the individual in the system, right? So, and with that, the organization keeps reinventing itself, and that is what it keeps, it keeps it to be adaptive and responsive. And this makes it really exciting, because if we look at a lot of organizations today, it feels like it's very rigid systems. And then even like in this space of, I always call like this new work bubble, like we're coming with these new frameworks, and we keep looking for like the one blueprint that we can, like a cookie cutter put on other organizations again. And but at the end of the day, the real change and transformation, the real adaptation we want to reach and responsiveness is not happening. And then we're like wondering why. Well, now we have the answer, right?
Well, another thing that I would encourage people to bear in mind is that there always are these new conceptual frameworks that are being developed. And particularly as new generations uh, kind of appear on scene and develop their
Mhm.
capability. I mean, I was there 50 years ago, and I took what Tavistock had given us in STS and probably reformulated it a little bit because I was a filmmaker by training, and so I was looking at this in a dramatic way and so forth. But if you think about these notions of participative design of work systems for meaningful purpose, these concepts of organizing for humane, productive, and innovative work, and the 5 T's of STS have been around for quite a while.
Mhm.
It isn't that complicated, but it does require one to think broadly rather than narrowly. So,
But
yeah.
it's true. I find it really exciting because if you also look back, like, you know, there was not always technology, but there were tools. Like we humans, we made tools to be more efficient, or I don't know, you know, to different things, and that impacted our culture. But yet, I don't know, we have not really looked at it in
Well,
you know, as a whole
I will
system
never
often.
forget, Tina, that Eric Trist, who I mentioned, was one of the originators of the STS concept at Tavistock in the 50s. He told me in one of our first meetings that his conceptualization was really inspired a lot by Lewis Mumford, who
Mhm.
wrote a book called Techniques and Civilization, which was about this interaction of technology and civilization. That a lot of who we are as a society is a function of our technology. I mean, just look what's happening with our climate issues and so forth.
Yeah.
A lot of it is a function of the technology we're using in order to generate energy.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like it's right in our face. And then if you hear about socio-technical system, you think like, oh, this is a very complex term, right? Like now we need to go a little deeper. But at the end of the day, it's the most logical, right? To look at, but it's how we view a system like an organization, how we view an
Yeah,
industry and a country and a city, right? And how it works and how we can actually put all these interdependent components together in the system and have it as you say. Like I loved it that you said it's about designing, because if we make a verb out of it, you have logically at the end of the day all the members of a system like that designing this and co-creating, co-designing the system together, which makes it resilient, which makes it adaptive, and which makes it responsive at the end of the day, right?
yeah, and increasingly, if you need to involve the entities and people that are in your ecosystem in order to gain that resilience,
Yeah.
because that's where a lot of the change is being driven is in the context.
Yeah.
And
And
now
the
it's all because
intention.
we're all connected. I mean, we didn't have this connectivity until the digital era, but now we do.
Not that visibly, right?
Yeah,
But I mean, it has always been there, right? In this ecosystem we live. Like when the Amazon is burning, we have an impact in Europe as well, right? So it's
yeah,
like,
but not
but
only
it was,
the change is, yeah, we can think about the impact on the environment, but what's now occurring is the environment is changing us.
right.
There's so
Okay.
much
And it's
change in the
accelerating.
context. There's this continuous feedback loop, and
Yes,
the question: do we listen to that feedback? Do
exactly.
we build on that feedback? Do we incorporate that feedback? I mean, do we make the customer part of our organization, really? Do we make the
Yeah.
patient part of our healthcare system,
Yeah, exactly.
as opposed to someone that's treated by the healthcare system?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you know, like being part of the context, because oftentimes it's like, oh, here you have a problem, solve it. But it's like, okay, but what's the context, right? Can I please relate first to the context and have all the information I need? But working in silos, thinking in silos, and actually also leading, a lot of leaders lead in silos. We don't have this opportunity sometimes even.
Well,
So making people part of that with participatory leadership is creating this evolving loop.
and
Yeah.
I mean, and part of why I was encouraged to have this conversation with, and that may be something that folks in your community can make use of, is the fact that unfortunately in North America anyway, and I think in Europe as well to the greater extent. The academic world, where people are trained in how to think about work, how to think about technology, how to think about organization. People, their learning is captured in silos. These academic silos of disciplines that don't tend, for the most part, to interact. And that's part of the challenge of the socio-technical systems thinking, is that it's cross-disciplinary. By definition, has to be that way.
Yeah.
And I know personally, I have always found whenever I can interact with, say, an engineer or an IT practitioner who's got that human-centered concern and interest, we've got it.
Very nice. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Bert. I wanted to ask our audience first also if there's any questions, because I remember we haven't even asked are there questions. We have been so like swept away by our conversation. But yeah, I think maybe we have answered them all, Bert. So
well, not likely. And I want, by the way, I want to give a tip of the hat to a friend of mine, Paul Twaczynski, who was so an active force in creating the European Organization Design Forum, because I think that was a wonderful piece of work that Paul has done. And you know, I always enjoy interacting with EODF friends. So, and we have a lot. We have in the SDS community, we have a global network now, including people from Netherlands at the Ubel de Sitter Institute. We have a network in Norway. We're growing a network in Germany now. We have a network in Australia, and we have this network in North America called the SDS Roundtable, where we hope that people will come and visit in September, but we'll always be able to somehow interact cross space with forums like this.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Like, I think like the September event sounds extremely exciting. So I hope, you will have an amazing time there. And I'm very grateful, like, to get to, speak to you through the EUDF and getting to know the SDSS Roundtable. And I just see, like, Lorena also put the link to the event for September in the chat again. So for everybody who's interested, or you can also get in touch with Bert, of course, like, or go via the website. And I hope we keep this conversation up. And because I do have like a couple of thoughts, I'm thinking, we should talk again, Bert. But for now, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. And I'm really excited about the SDSS Roundtable. It's a very interesting thinking. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Tina. I really enjoyed the opportunity to have conversation before and after this and during this event.
Amazing. Oh, here we do have a question from Esther. How can Esther get connected to the German community? Do we have a contact here?
If folks would email me, I can give them a contact. But one of the primary contacts right now is a gentleman by the name of Wolfgang Ketter, Koetter, Wolfgang Ketter. And another colleague is a gentleman by the name of Eric Latniak. Now, this is an emergent group in Germany, but they've done some great work. There's Thomas Herrmann in Germany, who we're working with on some design principles for integrating human-centered AI and organization design. Thomas Herrmann. Some of these folks are near retirement or on retirement, but they can put you in touch with some of the younger folks. But as well, many of these people have been doing good work for a number of years, and it just hasn't been widely known.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bert. And to Esther, if you don't find these folks, get in touch with us and we will connect you. And yeah, thank you so much, Bert. Have a beautiful day, because for you it's just starting. So I hope we could bring some sunlight to it. And thank you so much to our audience. And yeah, we'll see you soon in a session. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Tina.